Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So today I thought to have fun and create some little brooches or pins, depending on what you call them. This one's done completely in polymer clay, but giving the look of a sunset with a silhouette. It's actually fairly straightforward to do, made up just of simply two Skinner blends, one for the background colour and one for the foreground clouds. And then we just add some little black silhouettes to go in the middle. You also don't have to use black. For the silhouette, you can just use any dark colour, completely up to you. So this is just a sample, and then how you do it and how you create your own is entirely up to you. And this one just shows you what you can do with the leftovers from the sky of this one, which was then used as the background for this one. So this is the main one I'm going to do. It's a fairly easy technique. The only difficulty is getting the clouds going and getting the reflections going in the same direction. So I'll give you the tips on how to do that. There are loads of photographs online to give you inspiration on how sunsets look, how clouds look. I've just done it one way here. But once you see how to do the techniques, then obviously you can do whatever shape, size of clouds, colour of clouds. What I would say though is use the images online as inspiration. Don't copy them exactly, particularly if they are copyright protected. But inspiration is fine, just to give you an idea of what to do. So we'll start by going through the equipment you need for today's session. The equipment we need today is fairly straightforward, but in a couple of places I give you alternates, so I'll run through those first. Main thing, as normal, is this, the polymer clay blade. I often refer to these as tissue blades. A little craft knife always comes in handy. A polymer clay roller, either one like this, or a brayer roller. Either of them will work well. For creating the cloud shapes, we're going to use a tool to actually smush or move the clay around. So you could use the cable needle, which is the tool that I use for a lot of my videos, so a lot of you I know will have those. What I would normally use is one of these tools, which is a little modelling tool, and it has a flat sort of foot on the bottom of one end of these double-ended tools, and that's great for moving the clouds around and digging in. However, I know most of you won't have, or maybe won't be able to get one of these tools. So as an alternate, you can use one of these. Now these are easily available online. They're little ball tools. So they've got little rounded knobs on the end, and you get a pack generally of 5 different colours, and they're easily available and relatively cheap on the internet. So I'm just going to use one of these because I reckon that's what most of you will be more likely to have in your toolbox. At one point of the technique, I'm going to create a straight line, and I'm going to use this using the blunt side of an old tissue blade. So what I've done with masking tape, I've carefully covered up the sharp end with a couple of layers, so I'm not going to cut myself, and then I can use that to create a nice straight line. If you don't have that, you can just run the back of your craft knife down the edge of a ruler. You could use something like an old credit card, or if you've got a nice thin metal ruler, use something like that instead. When we first create our piece, we're going to do so on a tile, so it's in situ and we don't move it until the first time we bake it. So a small tile, whatever size you're going to use for your brooch or pin will do. To create the template, I've actually used this, which is from a set from PC UK Tools, and it's a set number 6. Now, as you'll notice in the video, I was starting out using this shape, which is the largest one, but I then actually went a little bit larger, and I went larger by simply using this on a sheet of paper, drawing around, folding it in half, and then expanding out to give myself a larger size. So again, that's what's great about having these sort of templates, and there are loads of different places online where you can get them and where they're available. I'll give you the link to this particular one, but I know those of you who work in polymer clay, you're likely to have all sorts of wonderful template sets yourself, so just use something that is handy, or draw up your own template if you wish. When we use the thin sheets of clay that we're going to do, I find it easiest to use it on a laminated sheet. So those of you who've seen my videos before, this is just my normal measuring sheet, freely downloadable from www.printablepaper.net. However, I'm not actually using this side, but because I laminate mine, I'm just using the side, the plain side that's laminated. So anything that's laminated will do, or piece of greaseproof, parchment, baking, wax paper, just something you can easily lay your clay on and you'll be able to peel it off when we get to that stage. You're also going to need a couple of sheets of paper if you want to make templates, both small ones for the clouds and for the silhouette, and also a larger piece if you did want to create your own template shape. So obviously you need some form of pen or pencil and scissors to cut them out. When we flatten or smooth across our piece, you're going to need a couple of sheets about this size, or certainly big enough to fit over your completed piece, again of baking parchment, wax, greaseproof paper. As well as using either your roller or your fingers to press down into the clay, it can be quite handy at times to use something like a stainless steel soap, particularly if you've got problems with arthritic joints in your fingers. So it's not necessary, but handy to have one of those, and I'll put a link to that in the details below. To create a nice bit of texture on the back, I'm just using this, which is actually some underlay from IKEA. It gives a nice sort of checkered effect when you press it down into clay. But use whatever texture sheet you happen to have to hand if you want to put texture on the back of your piece. When we're adding the unbaked clay to the baked clay and for putting the brooch pins in, I will use a little bit of liquid clay. This is just ordinary liquid clay. I've just decanted it into a pot because I find it easier to stick my finger in that and get little bits out as and when I need it. If you're making a brooch or a pin back, then you'll need one that's the right size. This is the sort I'm going to use. The ones which have the sort of the safety opening. You can pin them open and then close them back up. So choose a size that's suitable for the piece you're working on. And when I create a border for my piece, it's handy to have something nice and long and flat and quite stable, so something like this metal ruler just to cut against. Now I say metal ruler, this used to be a ruler, but with polymer clay and all the wiping and cleaning I've given it, all the little indentations and marks have been cleaned off, but it was originally a ruler. You need a nice clean cocktail stick or something similar, and this helps us create the little tree shapes and patterns in the silhouette. When we're baking our piece for the second time, we want to bake it face downwards onto the tile. So to save it going shiny where the surface hits the tile, I just use a piece of card big enough to take your shape. And before I put the border on the side of my piece, because I had it separately, I do just sand just around the edge just to make it nice and flat, and I've just used one of these wet dry sanding blocks for that, and it's about 240 grit. As I say, you don't need to do that, but if you want to, that's a good way just to give it a little sand just around the edge of your piece. Other than that, I will be using biodegradable wipes to keep my hands and tools clean as I go, and just ordinary tissues just to clean off any wetness if I have used the wipes, and of course a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use. If you do not have a pasta machine, then you can stack up layers of playing cards on either side of your clay, roll over the top and get an even thickness of clay in between. And last but not least, whenever I bake, I always tent my tile with some aluminium foil, making sure the foil doesn't touch the clay so it doesn't create indents, but it just creates a safer environment in the oven should your oven spike, and it will make sure that your clay doesn't get burnt. So that's all the equipment we need for today's session, so let's move on to the clay. I'm using Fimo Soft for today's project, but any of the well-known brands of clay will work equally well with this technique. First thing you're going to need is some scrap clay just to put underneath your piece. This won't get seen at all, and there's probably about an ounce or 28 grams of scrap clay. If you don't have any scrap, then just use a colour that you don't particularly want, because I say it's not going to get seen, so don't use your best colour to go underneath the whole piece. For the actual colours, we're going to make two Skinner blends, one in this blend and one in this. Each of these pieces are about 1/8 of an ounce or 3.5 grams in size, and we're going to use for one combination the lemon yellow, white, peppermint, brilliant blue and Windsor blue. Then for the other one I've got sunflower yellow, tangerine, Indian red, ruby red and plum. And then we've got 1/2 ounce, about 14 grams of black, of which I've taken one piece off the same size of this. This piece will be for the silhouette, and this piece will be for the backing and the sides of our finished piece. First thing I'm going to do is condition all of the clay in their separate amounts. If you're unsure how to condition clay or why we do it, I do have a video with a few tips and techniques, and I will put a link to that in the description below this one. I'll put all these colours through on setting number 3 and just create little sort of rough rectangular blocks of them so they're ready to go together in a Skinner blend. For the black, I'll condition that amount on setting number 3 as well, but this one I will put through on setting number 3 to condition it, but then I'll have it on a nice thin setting, so your thinnest usable setting, which on my machine is 9, and on my machine 0 is thick and 9 is thin. So say I'll get all of those done on setting number 3 and bring you back, and we'll start with the Skinner blend with those 5 colours. I've conditioned the scrap clay on setting number 3, and I've got my tile ready to work on. So I'm going to put the scrap clay down, give it a roll to make sure there's no air bubbles trapped underneath, and find the stencil or the shape that I'm planning to use, put it down in the middle, and then just very roughly score around the outside. And the only reason I'm doing that is to give me a rough idea of how wide I need my Skinner blends to be. Having removed the shape, I'm going to sort of cut down where I think my horizon line will be, just very gently score it, nothing more than that. And now I know that my Skinner blend needs to be whatever the width is of the wider part, whether it's above or below the piece that you're using. So having got our rough shape and size, we can now start building our Skinner blend. I'm going to take the yellow, the white, the peppermint, the brilliant blue and the Windsor blue, and make a Skinner blend with these 5 colours. And I put the white between the yellow and the peppermint so that I don't get a green in the middle. If you get a very slight green, that's fine, because you will see that in the natural sunsets, but I certainly don't want a strong green in between, so I've put the white to stop that happening. So as per normal, the end 2 pieces cut down on the diagonal, and all the other ones chop down the middle, and then layer the 2 pieces on top of each other. And then you can put them all together. So those ones go to slight diagonal, and then the yellow goes on the end. And I'm looking here that where the yellow goes and where the blue goes, that there's actually a little bit of white in between, and that's perfect for what I want at this stage. If you're unsure about doing Skinner blends, I do have a video tutorial which I will put a link to with a few tips and techniques on how to get a good Skinner blend. And as you can see, I could cut these bits off and put them on the bottom here, but we're about to put this through the pasta machine, so it really doesn't matter. I am just going to fold this once, just to give myself a little bit of a head start, and then pinch across the bottom so that those colours are now slightly overlapping each other. And then as per usual, we'll put it back through the pasta machine, fold end first, on a thicker setting, because we've now got 4 layers of clay. So I'll put this through on setting number 2, and I will collect it and fold it top to bottom each time I put it through until we've got a nice blend going. We will, once we've got that done, need to shrink this down until it's the width that we want it doing, but I'll get the blend first and then show you how to shrink it down at the next stage. Once you've got the blend more or less done, it's time to start thinking about the size you want your Skinner blend to be width-wise. So as I say, mine needs to be about that wide to go round the score line. I don't know if you can see that, but the score line on my piece. So I need it to be slightly wider than this piece, which is the longer piece between the top and the bottom. So I need to shrink this down quite a bit. So I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm actually going to press it thinner with my fingers to start with, creating almost like a little bit of a concertina wave in there. Then I'm going to put it back through the pasta machine. And when I put it through, I put this end up against the edge of the pasta machine, and I held my thumb just against this piece, not close to the rollers, but just pressing it in as I pushed it through. So you can then fold it up and then repeat. Just press it in all the way along. Have a look, check the size up against your piece. So it's getting there. And this time I'm on setting number 2 at the moment, but because I've got quite a long piece here, I'm going to put it up to a thicker setting. So I'm going up to setting number 1. And again, I put one end up against the side of the pasta machine and just kept my thumb keeping this side pressed in. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, then you can use something such as an unopened packet of clay, some magnets, just something that will sit inside the grooves of your roller right up to the space where you want it to go, and then you simply fold your piece up and put it between either the edge of the pasta machine and the blocks, or if your edge of your pasta machine is dirty and makes the clay dirty, then put a couple of blocks in, or a block and something else this side, and create the space that you can just put this down in the channel in the middle of. These things will sit quite nicely, just balanced, and they won't go through the rollers, but it just gives you a nice groove to put your clay down through. So I'm going to do, actually that's pretty spot on what I've got now. So that's now roughly the right size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going through this setting number 1 until I've got a very smooth blend again on this thick setting. You only need one side of it to look nice, so don't worry if it doesn't look so good on the other side. But when you've got one side with the blend that you're happy with, then put it through to a thinner setting, so a setting you're going to use to cover the rest of the background. So I'm going to use a setting number 3, so I'll put that through just to give myself one nice long thin sheet this width on setting number 3. And I can now chop a couple of pieces the right width for what I want. It's always handy to keep the extra piece to one side because you might need to use a few bits of that to patch something if you want to add extra bits later. So I'm going to take those off to one side, and I'm going to chop off the ragged edges to give myself a nice neat edge. I'm also going to take a thin strip of the scrap clay I'm going to place that right down across the centre, because that's where our silhouette of the trees is going to fit. And then we simply press on those bits, one to the top, one to the bottom, and there we have the start of our silhouette. It actually looks quite nice just like that with the dark line in between, but we're obviously going to add a few more details and add those clouds in to give us that nice sunset look. With a nice clean roller, I'm just going to give it a roll to make sure that that clay's nicely pressed down onto the bottom and that there's no air bubbles in between. So let's make the Skinner blend for the clouds. We're going to do exactly the same with the Skinner blend with these 5 colours. So we've got the sunflower yellow, the tangerine, the Indian red, cherry red and plum. Diagonally down each end, straight down the middle ones, put the 2 layers together. And these colours, we need to make sure that they're just darker than our original blend. So they're going to we've got the bluey colours to a certain extent of the clouds, but obviously the lighter area is going to pick up where the sun's going to catch the bottom of the clouds, but you're going to get a nice deeper, darker blend than the blend we used for our original colours. So we're going to do exactly the same with this as we did with this one, and we're going to get it to more or less exactly the same width as well. So just follow through and I'll bring you back when I've got this one to this stage. Once it's roughly the right width and I've got that nice blend going, I'm just going to chop off probably about just under a half. I'm going to keep this piece because, as I mentioned, you don't need very much to do the cloud detail, and with this one I'll show you how you can actually create a slightly darker one with another colour option towards the end. So with the one piece I've got, I'm going to put this down to my thinnest usable setting. So you can either keep going down one setting at a time, but try to make sure it doesn't stretch too much wider as you go, or if you're lucky and your machine doesn't shred or tear your clay, you can go straight down to your thinnest setting. However, as always, if you're changing lots of settings on the pasta machine, just turn the candle a couple of times first, just to release any clay that may have got stuck underneath. So let's put this down through to that setting number 9 and see what we've got. So there we go, more than enough clay strip to deal with our cloud, and I'm just going to put that on the back of my laminated sheet just to make it easier to work with. So we've got to decide what sort of shape we want our clouds to be drawn in. So taking the shape template that I was working on, I just drew myself roughly the top portion round the outside, and then just drew in very roughly the shape of a few clouds all going off in a diagonal line. And then I've just cut out the shapes very roughly according to those pieces. Now the reason why we're doing a paper template for this is because when you've got such a thin sheet of clay, and let's say we wanted it as thin as we possibly could, it's very difficult to cut a shape and then turn it over without distorting the shape. So using a little paper template is much easier to do. So thinking about where your piece is going to lie. So if we put our first piece about there, place it where it would be. So if you like, the same amount up in the scene, so if that's probably about 1/4 of an inch or sort of 3/4 of a centimetre up, so do about the same place up on there and put your piece down. And every time we put a piece on, we are going to do the same. So if this piece was going perhaps up here, so about 3/4 of an inch or about 1.5 centimetres, then I'd put him about up to there on that piece there. So bearing that in mind, I'll move away from this now and we'll just concentrate on these pieces. And I'll just do this first one. So all I'm going to do is very carefully, with a craft knife, just go around the shape. Don't worry about finger marks, don't worry about the shape being incredibly accurate, because as you see in a minute we are going to smush this and change it and do all sorts of things, so you don't need to worry about that. But having done your first shape, now I always find this easier to turn on the side rather than looking as if you're looking straight on, because it's very easy when you're doing silhouettes, and you'll see I do the same when we work on our piece, to be difficult to see when you're looking at something. We're trying to do the upside down piece of another piece. Let's move that down just a fraction. But if you turn it so that you're side on, look at the pattern it creates in the middle to see whether or not you need to go slightly further up. So we'll move him just slightly further up. So I'll see my sword towards the top end of the red there, top end of the red there, and that gives me that nice triangular shape. And that's the way I find it easiest when I'm dealing with silhouettes, not to look at it upside or straight on, but to turn it on its side and look at the patterns and the spaces it creates. So having got our first shape cut out, we can remove the paper, and as I say, do not worry about getting your knife gouged in or anything else. And I'm then very gently going to run the blade under that piece so I can release those shapes. And the first one I will do, so I'm looking at it straight on, and place it, put that back down to give me a rough, let's just do that first. I'm going to go quite wide around the outside, but just to give me a rough idea of where I wanted to go. So this first one is going to go, I think we said about 1/2 inch up, 1/4 inch rather, so let's put him just about there. And then for this other piece, I'm going to turn it on its side, so I can see I'm roughly the same distance away, and I'm looking at the angle and put him on. Although it's not going to matter any later on, I'll just take that little piece off. So that's our first piece, and then just carry on doing exactly the same. So I've got another 3 pieces to add on, and I will just put them on, say decide where I want them on my piece, put them on here, flip them over and do the opposite, and then start layering them up on this piece here. Once you're happy with the pieces you've got, don't scrunch this piece up. You can sort of chop it into pieces and just lay them back on top of each other in the right positioning, using the bottoms as your guide for the top and the bottom. And then of course you can put that back through or add it to the piece you've already got left over, and that will make another blend to do another silhouette. But keep it to hand for now, because you might want a few extra pieces just to add in to this piece as we go along. So now for the fun bit, now to sort of create more sort of cloud shapes from our initial slithers of this coloured clay. Now, as I mentioned, you can use any one of these 3 tools. If I'm just sitting by myself, then to be honest, this is the one I would normally use, and I will sort of like smooth down and sort of create shapes, because this one's also good for gouging out pieces. However, I know most people won't have one of these. You can also use, obviously, as I said, the end of your knitting needle just to sort of smush the shapes down slightly. But for today, I think most people would have access to one of these ball tools, so I'm going to use one of these there because they're so easily and readily available, just to show you can get the same effect doing this. So the theory is, whatever we do to the top, we repeat in reverse for the bottom. So for instance, if the first thing I do is pull this piece out, then I need to pull that piece out too. Now, some things are quite straightforward and easy to do, as I say, looking at it straight on, but other things, if I'm curving this way, personally I find it easier to be looking at it side on to think, okay, curve that way, now I need to curve that way. So if this one curves that way, this piece needs to curve that way. And just keep doing that. Whatever you do on this side, repeat on this side as you go further down. And the last thing you want to worry about is it breaking off or moving, because that's the whole point. It's when the clay moves and breaks off, and even you can add on little sort of extra bits sort of going in a certain direction, that's when it becomes and starts to look more cloud-like. And of course, if you don't want to do this, and you don't want to have an image reflected in the bottom, you could just have the top part being a sunset and just have the silhouette on the top and just leave it at that, so you only have to concentrate on one half of the image. But I'll go back and I'll carry on doing this, and I'll stop and bring you back to real time when I've actually got most of these bits done and we get to the next stage. So when you've got a fair bit done, and don't stress too much about it being completely accurate, you just want a rough idea of the 2 bits being the same. The other thing you can do is you can go to your original piece, lay it roughly where it would be, and say we want to put a little bit of sky in the middle of that. Just take a corresponding bit, scrape some off, and drop it right in the middle. And then you can push that round, and it looks as though the sky's showing through that bit of the cloud, and it sort of breaks the cloud up if you've got too much showing in one area. But of course, don't forget, whatever you do at one side, you've then got to do in the other. So just keep playing around, adding bits in, taking bits out. The general rule, as I mentioned, is that the colours towards the bottom tend to be the lighter ones and then going darker, but of course you can have the backs of a cloud here and then the front of another cloud showing, which will pick up a bit more light. So you can go back in here again, add a little bit of, say, the lighter orange into the top here to create some different parts of clouds and shadows, and just keep playing around until you get an effect that you're happy with. When you think you're happy, take one of your pieces of paper, greaseproof, wax, tracing, whatever, press it down, and then either with your finger, very gently just press downwards, because we don't want to spread this clay out, we're just pressing down, or you could use one of the stainless steel soaps to do the same, or you could use the side of your roller, but we're not rolling it in. We are literally just pressing it down. For something this small, I find the fingers not too bad. If it was a bigger piece, then I'd use the stainless steel soap to stop getting too much pressure on my fingers. So we're just pressing down in, trying to maintain those shapes that we've got. When it's more or less ready, take it off, and now you can just roll across the top, making sure of course that your roller is nice and clean. And there we have our clouds across the lake, and all we need now is to get our silhouette piece. And the silhouette piece again is very easy. We're just going to make sort of like make it look like little trees sitting across the background there. So take your piece of paper. And it doesn't need to be big at all, but it needs to be as wide as your piece. Fold it in half. And with a pencil, just create sort of little up and down sort of triangular bits. Go sort of quite near down at one bit and perhaps up for the next bit. And with it folded, just cut that out. Open your piece out, see what you've got, and of course if you don't like it, you can always go back and change and cut something else. Let's just put that back on so we can just see roughly what we're going to get. So you can change the positioning of it. So if I'm going to do, let's see, I'll probably do slightly more of the bottom than the top, so therefore I'll have the narrow bit over there. So my bit, for instance, would probably go down like that. So once you've got that done, find your piece, your single piece of black clay that's been nicely conditioned, and I've put this through my thinnest usable setting. So again, for me, this has gone down to setting number 9. I'm going to take my piece off, lay it on there, and then as before, just with your craft knife, cut around the whole shape. Gone out both sides, but extended it slightly longer so you can peel away the black. I might actually turn it that way around if I've got enough. Keeping that down there. Place across your middle piece. And there's your silhouette. And I'm just going to give myself a guideline by putting this halfway down, and again it's easier to turn it side on so you can see all the way through. So with the blunt edge of the blade, keeping my fingers well away from the sharp piece, I'm just pressing down to give myself a little line or a groove. I don't know if you can see that down the middle there. So that gives me an idea of what I'm doing. Now again, if you're happy with it like this, just leave it as it is. But if you want to do the little trees, they're very, very simple. First thing I'm going to do is with the end of the ball tool, I'm just going to press the edge of the clay slightly flatter against the background so it's not quite so prominent. Give it a very gentle roll to make sure I've got no air trapped underneath. And then with our nice clean toothpick, I'm simply going to pull the clay slightly up, leaving gaps in between to create the tops that look like little fir trees. All the way along. Oh, that one went a bit high. And then turn around and repeat, trying to pull it high in the same places on the other side. Now I did all of that with one end of my cocktail stick, so now I've got a clean end. I can go back in, and from the light area I can actually pull down slightly, but each time I'm going, I'm cleaning my cocktail stick, so it gives more of a feeling, particularly where you've got some larger trees, but not being quite so flat. And again, having gone down one side, you need to go down and repeat down the other side. And once you're happy, get another clean sheet of your paper, put it down over the top, and again very gently with your finger or one of the other tools, press in. So I'm pressing and I'm rolling from the top in, so I'm not extending that clay outwards, and I'm keeping those shapes that we've created. Have a look, see what you've got. So this time we want a bigger groove, so because we're going to add a little light area where the water, at the bottom of the trees, where the light hits the water of the lake. So have a look to see where your last one was. Try and get it nice and even if you can along both sides, but don't worry overly much. But just create a little groove right down the middle that we can put our water line in. So next thing to do is to clean your hands, because if like me you've got little bits of black all over, and we are going to need a very tiny piece of this lightest colour, so our yellow clay, and we're going to roll a very thin line that's going to fit right in that groove. But clean hands, clean towel, clean everything so we don't get any dirt on this as we go. Okay, so just pull the piece off. You need very, very little. Right into a ball, and then just start rolling it. And take your time with this. What I'm doing is, you can see there, I'm rolling, but as I'm rolling I'm pulling my fingers wider, and you want it as thin as you can possibly get it. Don't worry if it breaks up, that's fine, because you can always patch it in. Now that is sort of the size we're going for. Now I'm pretty certain that's going to break in a second. There we go, that's fine. So what I will do, if it does break, I'm going to start working on this end, seeing how far I can get it to go before it breaks again. If you're very lucky, well, that's not going too bad. I might stop there whilst I'm ahead. Cut that off and see if we can get that piece up in one fell swoop. That might be enough. Normally I'd take small pieces and patch them as it got close, but that could well be enough. So I'm going to dangle that down at that end, hold it in place with a cocktail stick, and see if I can stretch it across that groove. There we go. Now that was lucky, so I'm not normally that lucky. So maybe, hopefully you'll be lucky like me. But if it breaks, just put a little piece in, and then with the corner of one piece, just add it onto the next piece, and just keep going until you end up with a nice thin line. And all we're going to do, very, very gently, just roll across that, make sure it's in that groove, and nice and straight. When it is, just roll across our whole piece. And there we are, ready to go. So the only thing we need to do now is to put our template on and choose where we're going to cut through. Now of course, if at this stage you decide, I actually want it a bit bigger because I like more of the pattern we've got, there's nothing to stop you going larger. If you want to extend the size of your template, which I thought it might look slightly nicer, all you have to do is fold your paper in half, place your template and draw around it, and then draw an area slightly wider and chop around that. And you can open it out and see if you prefer the slightly larger shape. And I think for this one I do, because I get slightly more of the background in, as opposed to that one where I'd have cut off just a little bit too much. So having now got that in place, I can take my template, drop that in there, and carefully chop down the outside. I might just put that one back in place, just to give me something to hold on to. So with the craft knife, I'm just going to cut all the way around the edge. Just pulling those bit off, so just cut around the sides just to make it easier to remove all the clay, because it will have been pressed quite hard down onto the tile. And then we will see what we have been left with. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to neaten up those edges because I hand cut it. So I'll take the sound down for this because the sound of the metal on the tile isn't very nice, but effectively I'm just using the sharp edge just to press down and push in, just to neaten off the edges. So there's our pin or our brooch ready for baking. So I'm going to inset the pin on the back once this piece is baked with an extra layer of clay. So I'm going to leave that as it is now and not do anything else to it until it bakes at its first stage. I will, as normal, tent the whole tile in a piece of aluminium foil, making sure it's not touching the surface of the clay, and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay I am using. Once the piece has come out of the oven and is cool, it's time to put the backing on. So I've taken the rest of the black clay, put it through on setting number 3 of the pasta machine, and made a piece big enough to go around the outside of our piece. And I was going to cut the excess off just slightly wide all the way around. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the liquid clay, and this is just ordinary liquid clay. I just happen to have decanted it into a little pot for ease of use. And then I'm just going to add just a little bit to the back. So you want enough to make it tacky but not slippy. So it's sort of tacky, sticky, just a nice amount. And if you've got too much, you can always just take off the excess with the heel of your hand. Then obviously wipe your fingers and your hand. And then I'm going to turn that over and put it on the back of our piece. Start with one end when you've got it centrally placed, and then go up slowly and gently with your fingers, making sure there's no air trapped underneath. I'm going to pull just gently up around the sides. And it's up to you at this stage to see if you like the thickness of clay around the outside to go as a border. For me, I'm thinking that's a little bit thick for what I want, so in that case I'm going to do this in 2 parts. If you're happy with the size of the border, then when you pull it up, you could have put some liquid clay around the outside as well, so that when you pull it up, you then just, with your tissue blade, shave off the excess clay. But I'll show you how to do it so you get a thinner border than setting number 3 on the pasta machine. So for now, I'm not bothered about the excess clay around the outside. I'm going to cut that off in a minute, but I'm going to leave it in place just for a second whilst I do the pin on the back. However, anything that you've got a line in, which is the straight of the horizontal, you need to make sure that you're going to place your pin in the right place on the back. So to do this, with your tissue blade, just mark around the side where that line is on both sides, level with where it's going, because you can then turn over on the back and you can see where the horizontal line is going to be on the back of your piece. I'm just going to take off the excess clay just simply to make it easier for me to do the next piece, but I'm not being neat about this because the rest I'm going to take off in a moment. And again, it gives you a good idea as to whether or not you want that thickness of clay on. So it's just a bit heavy for me, I think. Now that I've got that horizontal line in, so I can clearly see how my pin needs to lie, I can put it above and in a central place, and then you just chop away the clay in a rectangle where your pin is going to sit, pick that out, pick out that piece, put your pin back in, sit him nicely in, or chopping off a bit from one end. You can fit the clay back in, and now with something like your knitting needle or your cable needle, just roll that in so you can smooth over and get a nice seamless area. Make sure you haven't caught the catch, lift that up. And just take a bit of time smoothing and neatening that off, and that way your brooch pin is nicely hidden under the clay at the back. I will also just press down to make sure that that little piece goes into the clay so you get enough of the spring when you're using your pin back. I will just roll over my guiding line because I don't want that on the back. And you can either leave the back as it is or you can put some texture into it, but before we do that I'm just going to shave off the excess around the outside. You can always just gently run around the edge with a damp wet wipe or something like that, a damp cloth, just to smooth over the edges. And then if you did want to put some texture on, as I mentioned before, I'm using this underlay from IKEA, and I like this one because you can just press down in and it gives the nice square finish. And because it's a straightforward or regular shape, I can then pick it up, pull that piece over, and I can match up my little squares so I can put the shape in either side of the pin as well. When you're happy with the piece, always check the front to make sure you haven't got any mess on the front whilst you've been working on the back. And look, I have. It's always worth checking. When it's ready, get your tile, get the little piece of card to stop the front side of this going shiny and place it that way up this time on your tile, and tent the whole thing as normal in aluminium foil and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And when that's out and baked and cooled, I'll show you how I put the final just a little strip around the outside just to give us a nice border. Once the piece was baked and cooled, I took a little bit of low grit, so 240 wet dry sandpaper, and just sanded all the way around the edge just to give me a nice smooth base to work on. You don't have to do that if you don't have any, it just helps you to have that lovely smooth edge to add our border to. I'm then going to take a little bit of the liquid clay and just run it around that edge. Again, as before, just enough to make it tacky or sticky but not slippy, so very small amount all the way around. And then clean your hands. I've taken the rest of my black clay and rolled it into a thin log, and you want the diameter to be thicker than the width of your piece, and then I'm just going to press it flat with my thumb. And I've already gone down through the settings of my pasta machine, cutting little bits of this black off to see which thickness I want to use, and I've gone for thickness on setting number 6 of my pasta machine. So I'm going to put this through thin end first, get a nice long thin strip of the thickness of setting number 6. So it gives me a nice long strip, much more than I actually need. So I'm going to lay that flat on my tile, have a quick look by going around as to how much I need, so it shouldn't be more than about that. And now, with something like a ruler, something that's nice and long and straight, with the corner of my tissue blade, I'm going to cut a straight edge along one side of my black piece. You can lift that up, peel away the excess, and now on the good side I tend to start down the bottom just to mask the join slightly. I'm very gently going to put that up around the outside of the piece as level as I can, with the brooch. If you want to go one side or other, go above it rather than below it, because you can always chop the excess off to neaten up the edge. Just go all the way around until you join up. You can generally see where the join is and just chop the excess off. Gently push the join closed. And then with your cable needle you can just very gently run around the outside, making sure it's nicely adhered and there's no air bubbles. Where you get to the join, roll gently across to make sure that join's nicely sealed, and then just pull the excess clay back and around over the back of your brooch or pin. I take the excess clay off the back first by sliding the blade in and then just going gently around the outside. Again, do it once or more than once if you need to. There's no pressure to do it all the first time. You can always go back and shave more bits off. Check that it's still nicely adhered around the front, and then you can do the same on the front. Just go around and shave off any excess. That should leave you with a nice thin border, and then exactly the same as we did before, lay it face down once you've tidied up the back on that card on top of the tile, tent the whole thing, that just gently pushed over, tent the whole thing in foil, and again bake according to the manufacturer instructions for the brand of clay you are using. So there's our piece, finished, baked and ready to wear as a pin. I wasn't planning on doing anything else with it, but of course you could varnish it, you could add a little layer of the resin to go over the top if you wanted a shiny finish, or do anything else you wanted with it, but I'm quite happy with it as it is. So I did mention that you could use the rest of the clay to do another version. So that one's made using that Skinner blend, and it gives you a much darker feel. So because I've got the back being that sort of dark, rich reds, this time I've done the clouds in a much darker blend. So the clouds, I've used this blend. So I've gone for cherry red, royal violet, plum, a little bit of brilliant blue, and then the Windsor blue, and done exactly the same thing to create those clouds going up and away. And in this one, I've got more of the reflection and less of the sky, and this one more of the sky and less of the reflection. So it all depends where you put that midpoint as well, and artistically it looks better if you put it so it's going one way or the other rather than straight down the middle. So there you are, two different looks of a sunset silhouette, all made by using polymer clay. I hope you enjoyed that one. It was great fun to do, and as you can see, actually quite easy when you get into it. Just getting those reflections in the same sort of direction is the only difficult bit of this one. You can use them for brooches and pins as I've done here, obviously fridge magnets, card toppers, anything else, pendants, whatever you want to do, and make any size and shape you want. You can make some really big ones and do journal covers if you'd like. So just experiment and have fun. I hope you enjoyed that one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to those of you who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. So I'm going to go off and see if I can take some more photos of some nice sunset silhouettes to give me more ideas to do for more polymer paintings. That's it for now. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.